Well, if you hear that noise, you know it's time for Alex Garrett Podcasting. And we're doing a bit of a podcast dump, meaning the last couple of things of the year I wanted to release, we're releasing today before the calendar turns to 2023. And this is the final One Leg Up with Alex Garrett episode, and it features New York Post Albany editor Zach Williams. First of all, I believe this is our first interview since you joined the New York Post, if I'm not mistaken. So, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me. It definitely has been a while.
And I know where everything's getting crazy, and then you're on with Cats, which I love. I love that you and him hit it off, so this is great. But I always love when you join us as well. So, talk to me. I know that it's been a weird month since she got elected governor, in the sense of people have been leaving the office. We've had a sexual assault scandal with the AG. I mean, there's some weird bad foreshadowing into the new term for Governor Hochul, or is it all like, I don't know, it's just weird what's going on, especially with the blizzard in her hometown. I mean, all of this is just, who'd have thought that would happen in a month after she got elected, right?
Well, let's step back, and we can already see that that Governor Hochul's period in office will surely be divided into two periods. One of them is the full term, if not more, that she'll get starting in January. And then we're going to have the, what would it be, about approximately 15 months that she had in office taken from Andrew Cuomo's term. You might call it the passage of power, similar to like when LBJ took over for John Kennedy way back when, right? He had a bit of time. That was his predecessor's actual term in office. And then, of course, he won a full term. And, well, in his case, we know how that worked out. He only served one term from there. But Kathy Hochul, she won her full term, but now we're seeing that first 15 months conclude. And what has she done? When she came in, it's easy to forget a long time ago that, she was replacing a guy who for about 10 years had been essentially the king of New York State, right? Andrew Cuomo, he knew how government works in the state, and for better or worse, he wielded power like few governors ever did. But then, of course, he fell from his pandemic stardom, and amid all these different scandals, the nursing home cover-up, the alleged sexual harassment, alleged sexual misconduct, the bridge, the book deal. He gave up in August 2021, and then this pretty obscure figure, then Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul, took over. And, there's been, I think, a few key issues that have dominated her term. The first one was, how can she supposedly redefine state government after all the scandals that led Andrew Cuomo to leave office? Second, we still have the pandemic going on. And then I think, another biggie has been the rising crime. So let's take them piece by piece. Governor Cuomo, old habits die hard, huh? Governor Hochul has made some progress, you might say, in making government more trustworthy or accountable. FOILs are being returned to reporters a bit quicker. They replace the always criticized state ethics agency with one that is slightly more palatable to good government groups. And there's been a few other things, too. When we're talking about rising crime and how she's dealt with that, it's hard not to avoid talking about how she's dealt with bail reform. In the state budget that passed in April, she did lead efforts, in fact, to make some tweaks that, made more offenses eligible for cash bail, while adding some more money to help the implementation of these controversial reforms. And then lastly, the pandemic, it's easy to forget, 1 year ago when Omicron was, really driving caseloads, it was easy to really focus on that issue as one that might really define Hochul's term in office. 1 year later, it's almost shocking how little people care about COVID now. You might call that a victory of sorts, deserving or not, for Hochul. But that said, when it comes to rising crime or, making, restoring trust in state government, obviously she still has a lot more work to do in the term that's going to start in January, and then there's another big issue that just has kind of, was kind of unforeseeable a year ago and has, was really big, has been huge since then. That's rising costs of living, inflation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 37, and for most of my lifetime, or all my lifetime, inflation has been kind of a non-issue in U.S. politics, to say the least. But over the past year, there's a lot of different causes. I'm sure nobody can quite put their thumb on how to solve it. The prices are rising, and the governors had to deal with it one way or another. So, I kind of added a fourth issue right there, but there's been a lot going on the past year. I think even the governor would concede that her work remains a work in progress. That's why you run for a full term in office, right? But, I think I can channel a lot of opinions here in the Capitol by saying, the big takeaway from Hochul is that she is who we thought she would be in many ways. Someone who, kind of moves with the political winds of, quite a bit actually, because she's not an ideologue. She's one of those people that wants to get things done, not cause a lot of drama and then get reelected and continue being governor, right?
Yeah.
Andrew Cuomo was a bit different. Andrew Cuomo was always eyeing the history books, always eyeing power, always eyeing Andrew Cuomo's place in all of it. Nobody questioned, what does Andrew Cuomo want? He wants to be bigger and better and more powerful. And if you try to get power, he thinks you're taking it from him. Hochul's a bit different. Yes, she makes power plays like any governor would. But I think, by and large, she tends to avoid public drama. She tends to work behind the scenes. And, it's really hard to know at times what exactly she wants, not least because her ideology is very pragmatic. When she represented Western New York in Congress, she was pro-gun rights. When she's in governor, and a lot's changed in 10, 12 years since she was in Congress, surely. But, now she's pro-gun control because she's the governor of New York. Her constituency changed, her opinions changed. She's not the only politician that did that.
Zach,
maybe it's a good thing.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just maybe it's a good thing that she's not as ideological. That's for voters to decide. But she surely had a hard time winning re-election against Lee Zeldin all told.
Well, I want to talk about that. I feel like she skated by on two big issues, well, three. The whole Buffalo Bills stadium situation was sort of swept under the rug, and I thought that was kind of interesting. That part, plus the fact that she had donors that were getting COVID treatment right away or something. I mean, what happened there? And then thirdly, thank God Alvin Bragg is not, wasn't off to a good start because we realized, hey, the governor has the power to fire a DA, and we never knew that. Well, I didn't know that until this was happening, and of course, she will not fire him, right? I mean, let's start there.
Boy, it really has been an eventful year because January 1st, or whenever it was, I believe, that Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, took office, he released a day one memo where he said, hey, we're going to charge people on these crimes and not on those crimes. And a lot of people took issue with that, to say the least. So, yeah, there's been a lot going on. And, getting back to what I said before, it all comes back to Hochul's desire to win that full term in office. No shocker. She's a politician that wants to win an election, and if you look at things through that lens, it explains a lot. She raised money like crazy from, all the Cuomo donors and more. She set a record in it, and many of those people, ended up having, believe it or not, things that they wanted in return, including a contract, $637 million during the Omicron wave. Remember that when COVID, everyone was saying, hey, we need COVID tests now. And her people, for whatever reason, bought $637 million from a New Jersey-based company connected to our campaign donors. And, Alvin Bragg, I think that's another interesting one. Remember I was talking about rising crime, right? And her political enemies attacked her all year long about how bail reform is supposedly driving rising crime. And they've used Alvin Bragg as the poster boy of the soft on crime, democratic, reformist politician. I remember when it first happened last year, when I was still working for City and State, I wrote, hey, there's a new boogeyman. His name is Alvin Bragg. And I'm so glad I was proven right about that. Look at me. I'm so smart, right? Sometimes. Sometimes at least.
Yeah.
And Hochul ultimately decided, hey, Lee Zeldin, her Republican opponent, is going to try to bully her to fire Alvin Bragg all the same. And even if she wanted to, she's not going to budge because she didn't want him to look like she's doing what he wanted to do. That's politics.
Well, let me ask you this because a lot of people think everybody thinks Zeldin ran a great campaign, and he did. He went crossing the state everywhere. But was it too one-sided? Did he just have that one message, or did you find him having multiple angles to his campaign?
Well, I think Lee Zeldin ran a very disciplined campaign. He typically repeated, a few key talking points. He's going to come into office. He's going to do everything he can to roll back those, bail reform and other criminal justice reforms. And whether or not he could do these things or not, he kept repeating it. He said he was going to cut regulations. Uh, and even though he had a lot of vulnerabilities, he's pro-Trump, he was anti-abortion, kind of anti-gun control, if you will. He stuck to his talking points. He repeated them whether or not they made sense at times, and he just kept coming after Hochul. And Hochul, kind of let it become a tortoise in the hare situation for a while. You had the tortoise Lee Zeldin, a Republican, sometimes gaffe prone, trying to win a race in New York of all places, and he's just kind of going, a little bit at a time. He wasn't raising money like crazy, or exactly wowing people with his sex appeal, but he just kept going. And her campaign just kept talking about abortion and gun control, and however persuasive those issues could be at the national level, they just weren't so animating in New York. And I think that accounts for a lot of the reason why Zeldin came closer than any Republican in 20 years to actually winning. Now, 6 points is still not that close. But, hey, 6 points is still pretty close for a supposedly solid blue state.
Absolutely, and I think that they both fought on the one issue and one won out, and the other. But he made waves in Albany, right? I mean, people are now like, well, what can he do next?
Well, I think Lee Zeldin, who, right? Like, the guy lost the election. Like, nobody cares about him in the state capitol. What they do care about is the wounds that the governor has incurred going into budget season. She was embarrassed. She raised more money than any other person ever to get elected as the first female governor in state history, and she still, I think the turnout says a lot. In Bronx County, about as democratic a place as you could ever find in the United States, they had like 23% turnout or something. That shows just how exciting Hochul was to the party base, and then you have, Suffolk County that, Zeldin won by like 15, 20 points or something. You could really just see that Hochul was, just was not exciting Democrats. If she had done that, hey, Democrats are like, 60% of registered voters or something in the state? Like, it's, it should have been easy for her, and it wasn't. And one, a good reason why was she didn't take it seriously. She stuck to issues that really just didn't resonate. And, ultimately she just didn't seem to have her finger on the pulse. And, one thing I'll just add is, all of her campaign people didn't come from New York. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them didn't come from New York. And, and I think there was a key reason why. I think Hochul came into her campaign. She's like, I want people that are loyal to me and aren't going to leak everything to the press, don't have relationships with them, aren't tied to Cuomo, people, that just aren't, don't bring the baggage of people in New York politics. And while that maybe helps, her avoid some leaks, it just kind of led to a lot of clumsy efforts where people didn't know exactly what was happening. And they just did not run a good campaign. The turnout shows that. And, Zeldin, really just, cost her a lot coming into what could have been, a very celebratory, entrance into a full term. She's the first female governor elected in state history, if she had won big, we might even already be hearing talk of like her running in, for president or something. Look at Glenn Youngkin in Virginia.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, it seems like she's not made any earth-shattering policy changes either, right? I think that's another reason why people are like, it's almost like people in the know of following all of this know more about her than people outside the know, right? That's how little she's made an impact and made wave, if you will.
Well, let's give her some credit. She signed a bunch of bills. She legalized to-go cocktails. If you're in Western New York, however much you hate, stadium deal elsewhere, she got the Buffalo Bills to commit to a new stadium. There were, there's things that she did. It's not like she didn't do anything. But I think, getting back to, kind of the lack of a core ideology. Like, what does Kathy Hochul want? Now she's won her, for the first 15 months, it was like, okay, she wanted to win, election, become the first female governor in state history. And that in and of itself is, pretty big. But now she's got a full term in office. And, this person that has spent her whole political career being a very ideologically pragmatic person, has to kind of look and say, I've been spending my whole life doing this stuff. What do I want to actually accomplish? And it seems like what she wants to accomplish is kind of more or less a continuation of what Cuomo wanted to accomplish. A classic, liberal Democrat, who wants to put her name on public works and, get some bills passed. And, you're just not quite sure, though, like, how the political winds might affect that. Right now she's talking big about affordable housing. It's really hard to know where she really wants to take the state. But if you look at the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding was made over the last 15 weeks or 15 months, so to speak, it just looks like she's kind of moving vaguely in the same direction that Cuomo was going.
Zach, I got to ask you this because you've been writing about the pay raises going on in Albany. She made time for that, and then I heard she didn't tie it to bail reform. I mean, what can you tell us about these raises? And it is kind of hilarious, isn't it?
Oh, my God. Hochul can be a very smart politician at times, but she has undoubtedly made some very, we'll just call them errors. Hiring Brian Benjamin as her lieutenant governor was one of them. She wanted a downstate person of color to be her lieutenant governor. And she picked a guy who had all these, fundraising scandals in his background. It was already in the news, and she picked him anyways. And lo and behold, he later got charged for bribery by the feds, had to resign, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that was one of them. Another one, was this pay raise thing. So Zeldin for months during the campaign was like, we need to bring the lawmakers back to Albany and repeal bail reform. And you're like, oh, okay, yes, the governor can beckon lawmakers back to Albany, but, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink. And, the lefties got, big majority in both, the Democrats have super majorities in the state Senate and the Assembly. And just because the governor calls them back to Albany doesn't mean they want to do what the governor does, especially when they have a super majority that can override vetoes, right? And, Zeldin would squawk about this all the time. And the Hochul people would just want people to roll their eyes and just say, that's not how Albany works. You have a legislative session in January through June, most of the action in the state budget. No, we're not going to do what Zeldin wanted and hold a special session repealing bail reform. Thank you very much. And then election happens, the real news starts happening, right? And, there's some murmurs from the legislature, hey, let's raise our pay. Now, we can debate whether or not legislators deserve to make $110,000 and now $130,000 or $142,000 a year or not. City members of the city council make $148,000 for what it's worth. But the only reason they wanted to come back at the end of the year is because of a bunch of boring rules that I won't bore you with. The raise would take effect in January rather than 2025 if they got it done by the end of December this year. And Hochul was asked about it, and for seemingly no good political reason whatsoever, she's like, yeah, they deserve a raise and, limit their outside income a little bit too. But basically giving them carte blanche to do it. And then, believe it or not, the legislators decided to do it. And, blowback ensued. A lot of people were like, hey, wait a second. So Hochul's cool with them coming back now, but not when people want to deal with bail reform? I thought it was like, you got to wait till the session or whatever. And all of a sudden now she wants to, supposedly it's so urgent we got to get pay raises. And then, it appears the Hochul people after a few days had second thoughts. They thought, you know what? We want to look tough on bail reform. So, and this is just speculation. I wasn't in the room, don't know for sure. But what we do know is that stories started appearing about how the Hochul people were pushing changes to bail reform in exchange for the pay raise, playing tough with the legislators. And then, legislators said, no, we're going to do our pay raises, and that's it.
Gotta ask you this, how is Buffalo doing? Speaking of Hochul's hometown, how is Buffalo doing? What's the update for us?
Buffalo's had a heck of a year. They had that racist teenager shoot up the supermarket in May. So that's one tragedy. And add to that, this last blizzard, we've already heard that at least dozens of people have died in Erie County after this historic blizzard that just came like a couple of weeks after 6 feet of snow got dropped on them. And, a lot of the attention has gone towards a few key decisions. There was a driving ban that was put in place in Erie County by local officials, the county, And then there was Hochul's decision to deploy the National Guard, which waited until Friday. The storm began on Friday, and some other stuff. But I think we got to keep an eye on that because, if anything, Hochul has always come back to, I'm a Western New Yorker. That's where I learned how to do what I do. And, we're seeing some emerging criticism about how she handled this historic snowstorm. People died. And the way this democracy thing works is that when people die amid decisions by officials, then we got to ask them to defend them. And, people are doing that right now. And, it's still going on. I think it's reasonable to say that, you can't judge the ball game while the manager's still calling the plays necessarily. But, we do have on-air commentators. That's me. And, what I see is a lot of looming trouble for the governor. She does not quickly explain all the decision-making, however long and torturous that might be with her growing list of critics.
And by the way, looting, I've never heard of looting in Buffalo. That was something that I didn't expect during the storm.
Something that kind of frustrated me a little bit about that is you see all these videos on social media, right? And, not everyone has, access to AI, deep state, fake technology. But it was really hard to know definitively, as a journalist from afar, I'm not in Buffalo, what's real and what's not. Because obviously looting's concerning. But, is it real? What's the backstory to what was happening? Because while, yes, stealing, gumball man, there was some guy with a gumball machine walking down the street. I don't think he was starving, or at least if he were starving, taking a gumball machine down the street probably isn't the way to do it. But, there were some very good people from Buffalo, people that know the community that are saying, hey, look, if people broke into whatever store to get bottled water because they're dying of thirst or trying to get some food because, they're frozen in or whatever, let's keep an open mind about that type of thing, right? Anybody would do that. But, what about this other stuff going? And it's not just the looting. You might call it a if not a breakdown, a severe dent in civil order. If people are dying in their cars because they can't get rescued, if the fire department cannot move because there's too much snow in their way, if snowmobile clubs have to bring in their machines to help people, doctors get to hospitals. This is all stuff that's going on out there. And if ordinary people have to break into stores, or a Target has to host people for several days, or if, people are just getting greedy and stealing stuff, then we need to take a good look at all of this and get some lessons learned, right? And I think that conversation's really beginning. And unforced errors, right? It's tough as a politician. If you admit mistakes, you look weak. Weakness isn't good. But from the mayor, Byron Brown, to the county executive, Mark Polensars, to the governor, Kathy Hochul, everyone has consistently said the preparations were good. There was enough equipment. It was just an act of God. And acts of God, unfortunately, do not translate well into political discussions because, acts of God are nobody knows what God does. All we know is, you deployed the National Guard on Friday and, in retrospect, at least, maybe it looked like you should have done it earlier. And it reminds me of someone who couldn't admit mistakes.
Huh.
The previous governor.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
We know how that worked out for him.
All right, Zach, I got to ask you this because I don't think you're obviously at the New York Post now, so I'm sure you didn't lie your way into the New York Post, but it looks like we've got parallel situations here in Brooklyn and in Long Island with Congress and Assembly. It's very strange how both of them are happening at the same time. So my question to you is this. Does the Santos decision, what they do when he gets into Congress, inspire Albany, or are they two separate processes that we're about to see, but could lead to the same result?
Well, there's a key difference. And, the state assembly, okay, so Lester Chang is a Republican. He won election in Brooklyn, and it appears that there's very good evidence that, at least legally, he kind of lives in Manhattan.
Oh my God.
And George Santos, a Republican who unexpectedly won a congressional seat straddling NASA and Queens, he won the congressional seat, and it turns out his entire personal background is fabricated. People are like, is even his real name George Santos? Okay, So that's a situation in both. Now, but here's the key difference. Lester Chang might not get his seat because the Democrats control the assembly, and they seem to be willing to bear the political price of blocking him from taking a seat by majority vote over the residency issue. Whereas the Republicans in Congress, who will be in the majority, do not care, seemingly, about Santos, or at least they haven't said so. Kevin McCarthy, who's the likely speaker but has still not gotten the votes to be Speaker of the House, hasn't said anything about Santos that I've heard about. So that all says that, Santos is going to get to serve 2 years in Congress no matter what. Whereas Chang, we'll see, but it's very possible he's not going to get to serve, or at least not to serve in the term that he won in November. There could be a special election. Maybe he could run again. Maybe he could win. We'll just have to see. But that's the difference between the two. The last thing I'll just say about Santos, the litany of lies, it just keeps going. It's like Anna Delvey, is blushing. It's really going to test that in this day and age, can there be someone who is so dishonest that they will be a pariah within their own party when they're really needed? We won't know how the Democrats might have dealt with George Santos if he had been on their side of the aisle, right? We just won't know. That's reality for you. It only works one way. But we will get to know how the Republicans respond when he is, they have a 5-vote majority in the House out of 434 members or something. They need this guy.
Yeah.
Or at least it's going to cost a lot to get rid of him. And I think something that was really interesting was that Marjorie Taylor Greene, the always controversial representative from Georgia, we'll put it that way, she's backing this guy. And she's been key to McCarthy's attempts to kind of, keep down the resistance to him becoming Speaker of the House. Sorry, so many legislative chambers. Speaker of the House, despite some resistance on the far right, from Matt Gaetz and some other Republicans. So that bodes well for George Santos, because right now George Santos is just looking to somehow get people to stop shutting up and get the headlines to go away and just say, hey, I'm going to become a rep, like it or not. At least if he doesn't get indicted and arrested in the meantime, because he's in some real deep doo-doo, when it comes to the financial stuff. But I don't even know if you want to get into
that. Not tonight, but I got to ask you one last thing, because I'm going to ask you a couple things, because obviously I want to get your year in review at the post your first year. But before we get there, the ramifications of him being allowed, this is the thing to me, by the GOP of Nassau County, to be even allowed to race without a background check. I guess you could say for the GOP in Brooklyn as well to not do their homework on this guy. That has ramifications for Albany too, in the sense of, well, do we trust who they're going to run in these assembly seats now?
Well, I think you're going to see journalists take more interest in making sure they thoroughly vet candidates going forward, and local parties as well. The excuse that Joe Cairo, the chair of the Nassau County Republicans, made about how George Santos somehow got through their purportedly solid vetting process was because, this is a seat that's mostly Nassau, but has just kind of a little bit of Eastern Queens. And, George Santos was from Queens. He's a Queens guy, we just didn't, we don't check Queens guys, And so that's what they say. I think, a couple years ago, 2018, I guess, that's still a few years ago. I did a story that kind of really opened up the whole Julia Salazar saga, the now still state senator. She was running in a Democratic primary at the time, who had claimed that she was Jewish, that she was an immigrant, she grew up working class, and reality didn't exactly add up to that, to say the least. But, George Santos is at a whole other level. Julia Salazar was saying, oh, I converted Judaism, and maybe it was, probably not true. Whereas George Santos, might have committed campaign finance fraud and people are saying, I did a story today where, somebody that really knows their stuff about national security is like, this guy's a potential espionage
he's
threat,
a huge national security threat. I just think that's the only that is the main reason you don't have him on Congress, because he's a national security threat. He could lie about anything at this point. So it's a very big risk to keep him on.
And if local parties in the future don't care about preventing, dangers to the United States, they do care about political embarrassment. So I'm pretty sure they're going to throw down a few more $1,000 every 2 years just to make sure that people are a little bit more on the up and up.
And what about you, Zach? How have you felt covering Albany in the New York Post? It's got to be a different speed, right? This whole year.
Well, that's a pretty good way to put it. I work for a daily newspaper now, whereas before I worked for a magazine, City and State. Where the writing was a bit longer, slower pace. Here at the Post, we're going for the top stories of the day and really trying to push them forward. Two things I would say about the Post, which is known to ruffle feathers on both sides of the aisle, especially the one to the left, is that everybody loves the Post till they hate it. And I think a good way of thinking about the Post is, it's kind of the id.
It's kind of the what?
New York media.
Uh-huh.
It's the outlet that, is always trying to go for what's most interesting and absolutely never boring. And, again, love it or hate it, people click on the Post because, we just make stuff that people really want to read. And if people want to read it, well, that's what we're here for.
Well, I know that you're working to keep going, but I also feel like you're not there to make the bombshell exclusive. You want to get this right? That's why politicians really throwing your name under the bus yet. I got to say that. I have not noticed that yet.
Well, to put it in some sports terms, one time, a long time ago, someone gave me some advice about basketball, which was always look at people's belts. Look at look at what they can't move. The one part of the body that they can't razzle and dazzle. People will fake you with their head, they'll fake you with their shoulders, their feet, and the ball. But so you got to look at the belt. You got to look at the one thing that really is just kind of stuck there, because that's where because then you can base everything from there, right? You can say, okay, I know what's going on. I know, this person's there. I know they filed their campaign finance thing. I know that, this is how much someone gave them or how much they spent. Yes, it's very important to get things right, especially in politics. There's some big issues here, both in Washington, obviously, but in Albany as well. A $220 billion budget. 213 state legislators, people that, need help, natural disasters, it's a real thrill to be a part of it as a reporter and do the best that we can to, keep politicians honest.
Right, and you're doing a damn good job. By the way, I know there are Zach Williams fans listening to this. He's not changed his Twitter handle. It's still Zach Reports, right?
Yep, that's me, and I think that puts it well. I'm Zach Williams, and I cover state politics, and I just try to report the news. That's all.
I'm pretty sure I accidentally called you Zach Wilson at least once, because he was just starting his Jets career at the same time as I was starting to interviewing you, and I'm like, Zach Wilson. I'm like, wait, no, Zach Williams, different guy, different Zach.
Yeesh, man, the Jets. No offense.
Well, you know about basketball, at least the Knicks are putting up 100+ points a game. That's fun to watch. So
hey, they're never boring either. So they belong in New York too.
Zach, I know that it's been a whirlwind year, and I would just say these two scandals are very New York. You don't expect it, but at the same time, it's a very New York thing, and I know you're going to cover it day by day at the New York Post for us and for the readers.
New York, love it or leave it, they say.
Love it. Well, don't leave it, Zach, okay? I know there's a lot of others that are. Like David Marcus is leaving the city, and I am so sad. He's awesome. Stay in New York, please. We need you here, Zach. Please.
Thanks so much, my friend.
Well, thanks, Zach, for joining us, as always. And we'll look forward to having you in the new year. Look forward to having more great guests on One Leg Up with Alex Garrett in the new year. Stay with us, and Happy New Year.